I never used to believe that a room could remember things. Then I spent 4 months alone in the basement archive of the Ashworth County Historical Museum, and I stopped believing a lot of things I used to take for granted. I was 26, hired as the overnight custodian and inventory assistant. The museum itself was unremarkable in daylight: creaky floors, dusty dioramas of pioneer life, a gift shop that never made money. But beneath it, 3 flights down, was the archive, a maze of steel shelving holding donated estate collections, unlabeled crates, and boxes of photographs nobody had catalogued since the 1970s. My job was simple: sweep, lock up, and once a week, log new donations into the spreadsheet before the archivist arrived in the morning. The first 2 months were fine. Quiet, even peaceful. I liked the silence of the place, the smell of old paper and cedar. It was on a Tuesday in October that things started to change. I was cataloging a box of Civil War-era letters when I heard footsteps on the floor above, slow, deliberate, moving room to room. I wasn't alarmed at first. The museum had motion sensor lights that sometimes tripped from settling pipes. But these weren't settling sounds. They were footsteps, and they were pacing directly above the archive stairwell, back and forth, like someone deciding whether to come down. I climbed the stairs and found the exhibit hall empty. Every light was off. I checked the front doors, locked. I told myself it was the building shifting, old wood contracting in the cold, and went back to work. But when I returned to my desk, the box of letters I'd been sorting was closed. I distinctly remembered leaving it open, the top letter still out, half-read. Over the following weeks, small things kept happening. Boxes I'd shelved would be back on the cataloging table by the next shift. A rocking chair from the Pioneer exhibit, kept in storage, wrapped in plastic, would be unwrapped and turned to face the archive door. I started keeping a flashlight on me at all times, even though every hallway had power. The night it got bad, I was alone doing a final sweep before locking up. I heard, quite clearly, a woman's voice from the far end of the archive, not words, just a low hum, the kind you'd use to soothe a child to sleep. I froze. The archive had no radio, no speakers, nothing that could produce sound on its own. I called out, asking if someone was there. The humming stopped instantly. Then, from somewhere close enough that I felt the air move near my ear, a voice whispered a name. Not my name. A name I didn't recognize, spoken with a tenderness that made my skin crawl more than any scream could have. I didn't investigate. I ran up 3 flights of stairs, set off every alarm getting out the front door, and sat in my car in the parking lot until sunrise. The next morning, I asked the head archivist if she knew of any history tied to the basement, deaths, incidents, anything. She hesitated before telling me the building had once been a boarding house in the 1800s, and that a woman had died there after losing a child to fever. The room she died in, as far as the old floor plans could tell, was roughly where the archive stairwell now stood. I gave my 2 weeks' notice the following Monday. I never went back down those stairs alone again, and to this day, if I pass an old building with a basement, I find myself listening, just for a moment, for the sound of humming. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is the box. I worked part-time at a regional historical society, managing their basement archive 2 nights a week while finishing my master's degree. The archive held thousands of donated items, journals, military uniforms, funeral photography from the Victorian era. Most nights, it was just me, a space heater that never quite worked, and the low hum of dehumidifiers keeping the paper collections from rotting. The trouble started with a crate that arrived from an estate sale, unlabeled, heavier than it should have been for its size. My supervisor asked me to open it and log the contents before she could review them the following week. Inside were mostly unremarkable things: ledgers, a moth-eaten coat, a small tin box of daguerreotype photographs. But there was also a mirror, hand-sized, framed in tarnished silver, wrapped separately in cloth like someone hadn't wanted it touching the rest. I logged it and set it on the shelf behind my desk, mostly forgetting about it. That was my first mistake. 3 nights later, I noticed the temperature in my corner of the archive had dropped noticeably, even with the space heater running. I chalked it up to the building's terrible insulation. But then I started noticing the mirror had moved. Not far, just angled differently each time I looked, as if someone had adjusted it slightly to get a better view of the room. I told myself I was imagining it, that I'd bumped the shelf without realizing. The following week, I was cataloging at my desk when I caught movement in my peripheral vision, a reflection in the mirror that didn't match anything in the room. Just a shape, pale and still, standing where nothing stood. When I turned to look directly at the empty space, there was nothing there. When I looked back at the mirror, the reflection was gone too. I should have stopped looking at it after that. Instead, curiosity got the better of me, and I started testing it, glancing at the mirror throughout my shifts, almost daring it to show me something again. For 2 weeks, nothing happened, and I nearly convinced myself I'd been sleep-deprived and jumpy. Then came the night I found the mirror turned to face my desk directly, angled exactly toward my chair, though I hadn't touched it in days. I sat down anyway, telling myself I wasn't afraid. Working under the desk lamp, I caught my own reflection in it, except my reflection was smiling, and I wasn't. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just sat very still, watching my own face smile back at me with an expression I had no control over, until it slowly faded back to a normal reflection, like nothing had happened at all. I wrapped the mirror back in its cloth that night and asked my supervisor to reassign it to deep storage without explanation. She didn't ask questions. I got the sense, from the look on her face, that she already suspected something about that estate collection wasn't ordinary. I finished out the semester, but I never sat facing that shelf again. And to this day, I don't keep mirrors in any room where I spend time alone. I want to start by saying I don't believe in ghosts. I still don't, not really. But I believe something happened to me in that basement, and 4 years later, I still don't have a better word for it than haunting. I was the solo weekend custodian at a small city museum, responsible for basic maintenance and occasionally helping shelve new donations in the archive below the main galleries. It was supposed to be an easy job, quiet building, predictable hours, minimal contact with anyone. I liked it that way. The archive itself was long and narrow, lined with shelves holding donated family collections, letters, clothing. The occasional urn of ashes waiting on provenance research before being returned to descendants. I never thought much about that last detail until the week everything changed. A new donation arrived, the estate of an elderly widow with no surviving family, donated by a distant cousin who wanted nothing to do with sorting it herself. Among the boxes was a small wooden urn, sealed, with a handwritten tag reading only a first name, Eleanor. Museum policy was to store unclaimed remains in a locked cabinet at the back of the archive until they could be properly researched or interred. I placed it there myself, feeling an odd reluctance I couldn't explain. That night, working alone, I heard something scratch against the inside of the cabinet. Not loud. Just enough to make me stop what I was doing and listen. I told myself it was a draft, or the building settling, and kept working. It happened again an hour later, 3 slow scratches, deliberate, like fingernails dragged across wood. I didn't open the cabinet. I finished my shift early and left. Over the following weeks, small disturbances followed me through the archive whenever I worked near that back wall. Papers rustled with no draft to explain it. My flashlight would flicker and die, only to work perfectly the moment I stepped away from the cabinet. Once, I heard a woman's voice say my name, Southwest, clearly and so close that I spun around, certain someone had let themselves in. The night I finally opened the cabinet, I told myself it was to check the urn was still sealed, still intact. It was. But the air around it felt thick, pressurized, like standing too close to a held breath. I apologized out loud, I don't know to whom, or why, for leaving her there, unclaimed, unremembered by anyone who might have loved her. The scratching stopped after that night. I never heard the voice again, and the flickering lights returned to normal. 3 months later, the museum located a great-niece willing to claim Eleanor's ashes, and I personally carried the urn out to the front desk the day she came to collect it. I don't know what actually happened down there. Maybe it was nothing, bad wiring, an overactive imagination, the pressure of working alone in a room full of other people's forgotten lives. But I think about Eleanor sometimes, and I hope, wherever she ended up, that she finally isn't waiting for someone to remember her anymore.